River Ward resident and former Riverside South Community Association President Craig Searle is now enjoying retirement alongside his wife Carolyn, but for 33 years he served in the Royal Canadian Navy as a Mars officer. He comes from a military background, with his father serving in the Royal Canadian Air Force for 32 years and also served during World War II. His grandfather and great-uncle also enlisted into the war as teenagers after immigrating to Canada and settling in Toronto.
My grandfather survived the war, but he had been gassed during the First World War in France, and he died at age 57 from lung complications suffered in the war at a very early age of 57. And my great-uncle, he enlisted as a teenager, was shot in the back in France, and died at the age of 20 after 1 year of being over in France.
On the eve of Remembrance Day, Searle and his wife Carolyn took me for a tour of the Beechwood Cemetery, also known as the National Military Cemetery, and showed me where many Canadian war veterans are buried. Around 75,000 people are buried in the grounds of the cemetery, around 400 of those being famous burials, including former prime ministers and governor-generals. It is the site where Canada's first Afghan war vet to be killed in the line of duty is buried, and is also the final resting place for Marie-France Comu, who was killed by Colonel Russell Williams in November 2009. Searle knows many people have passed away and are buried at the cemetery, and says he tries to go up and visit it at least a few times a year, especially around Remembrance Day. Looking back at his 33 years in the Navy, the active community member said he was able to travel across the world while he served and had the opportunity to visit many different places, including Scandinavia, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, and the west and east coast.
I think the most important thing for me is having had the honor to serve our country and defend our way of life and our collective rights as Canadians. When you join the military, you sign a blank check with unlimited liability, never knowing what's going to happen. And I can't imagine living in a country where your freedoms are at risk.
After recently taking a trip to China, Searle said he saw firsthand the impacts of a controlled society. Whether they were taking the train, checking into their hotel, or going sightseeing, they would need to show their passports and were always closely being monitored by cameras.
It's scary to think how much they're monitored. I'm thankful that we live in a country where we can enjoy our freedoms, express our individual rights, hold our politicians accountable, and speak our mind.
While veterans are highly respected now, Searle says it wasn't always the case. When he first moved to Ottawa in 1986 and would take public transit to work, he said people would refuse to sit next to him on the bus if he was in uniform. Since the Afghan war, Searle says Canadians have more respect for the military.
The bad vibes after Vietnam had gone, the bad vibes after the shameful act of us killing a Somali had just gone away, and now we're treated as first-class citizens, as second-class citizens, and we really appreciate that.
Searle said being in the military gave him a sense of leadership and respect. It also made him realize how thankful and fortunate he is to be a Canadian citizen. Charlie Cenac, TWIN News.